Hello again. I'm back in Toledo because I am back to talking about Frege and his article of 1891 about a book by Ludwig Lange that dealt with Newton's notion of absolute space and time when formulating his laws of motion. As I already told you, Ludwig Lange proposed, instead of Newton's system, a system he called inertial system. And I will now try to give a very brief outline of Lange's system and what Frege has to say about it as far as the basic suppositions about this system are concerned. And then, it won't be today, comment the parts I'm really interested in, that is the light this article throws on other very basic notions that appear in the system of Frege, which I think are made clear because in this case, which is the only case I know of, where Frege talks about a system of science that depends on empirical notions and is not merely a question of a priori knowledge of mathematics and logic. What Lange proposes, let's start with saying what Lange doesn't like about Newton's system. I have first to point out that I have not read Lange's book, so I don't really know what Lange really says about all this. I'm just relying on how Frege describes it. And well, since this is really what I want to talk about, I have no plans to ever read the original book by Lange. But still, in order to understand what Frege's point is, we will have to understand first, at least, how Frege sees what Lange's point is. Lange says, as Frege points out, that Newton makes some metaphysical suppositions which vitiate his notion of motion and rest, and which rely on some suppositions which cannot at all be proved empirically, and that therefore the system by Newton is plagued by problems. Instead of this Newtonian system, which relies on an absolute space and an absolute time in a rigid coordinate system, Lange proposes a system he calls inertial system. And what he does is he takes three material points to part from one origin and move left to their own device. That means they are not influenced by either each other or any other force about them, and they just move along what in his system would be straight lines in a continuous motion. Now, Lange's point about all this is that his system allows him to avoid the distinction between absolute motion and absolute rest, and he just describes the motion of the material particles in a system that is, as he calls it, ideal, versus a transcendental system, which is what he thinks would describe Newton's system. and which is rather useless, because the distinction between what is real movement versus apparent movement and real rest versus apparent rest is a distinction that absolutely has no importance whatsoever for science. Something like that. As I already told, I don't really know how Lange describes this, but this is more or less what I get out of Frege. Now, what I see is this is taking much longer to explain that I had planned on, so I will have to stop here and describe tomorrow what Frege has to say about this system, and in general what he has to say about the attempt Lange makes to improve on Newton's system, and if this improvement of Newton's system is successful or not, or for how far it is successful, and where it maybe fails. And once we have finished with that, we can deal with the more general problems or more general aspects of the article I want to get out of this writing by Frege. Okay, I see you tomorrow.